Audio.
If you enjoy the stories on this podcast, you'll also like the stories in my book, Filmmaking Confidential, which isn't just for filmmakers, but also all artists and really any entrepreneur. Now an Amazon.com and Audible.com bestseller. I just want to say thank you to all of you who ordered it. If you haven't yet picked it up, it's available wherever books are sold in most countries around the world. To find out more, check out filmmakingconfidential.com and stevebalderson.com. And thank you. I'm Steve Balderson, and you're listening to the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. Every week we meet with filmmakers, writers, actors, artists, and other notables. Many episodes include questions or commentary from other filmmakers listening to the conversation. Today's guest is actor and writer Jennifer Grace. Jennifer has been working as a professional actor since 1997, most notably in a record-shattering run as Emily Webb in Tony Award-winning director David Cromer's critically acclaimed production of Our Town, for which she was recognized with a Theatre World Award for Outstanding Off-Broadway debut. In addition to numerous stage credits, Jennifer has appeared in a number of television shows, such as Inside Amy Schumer, VEEP, and Billions. Her film credits include I See You with Helen Hunt, Kelly and Cal with Juliette Lewis, and my film, The Casserole Club.
Were you always a performer?
It's interesting that you ask that question because I have recently been thinking a lot and people have been saying to me, you should direct. And so I've been thinking about the progression from performer to director. And I was actually just thinking back to my childhood, like what are the things that could have led me to where I am in this moment? And the one thing I have to say is that it's twofold. One, yes, I always was putting on little shows, right? Either just with myself, my body, making everyone in the apartment complex pay a penny to come see me sing Christmas carols or whatever. And then I would cast all of the extras, like you can be in it, but you're just going to be standing while I, do a 10-minute solo. It's that, yes, I was always performing in some way, whether like that or, setting up elaborate scenes with my toys and making these miniature stories. But the other component is I was quite bossy. And I wanted to not only it was never enough to want to be in the story. I think I lost the track of that sort of as I became an actor in my early days of being an actor. The component that was missing was that, yeah, I want to be in the story, but I also want to steer it in, fundamental ways. So I'm sort of getting back to that.
Did you theater in school and all that stuff?
I always did it, I suppose, but not in that. I guess the thing is I hesitate because I do know folks who had access to what I would consider professional training or exposure to professional performing arts that I didn't have access to. So I think in my bumbling way, I was doing it very early and was mostly, self-led, self-taught because I don't come from a family of, of patrons of the arts. They just, we're not that kind. And, the high school I went to, very, very small, it's not like there was a drama department or even a promise that there would be a play every year. And if there was a play, it was, it was like the play version of made for TV special. It was like, made for high schools. You're not going to see this on Broadway. It's like, why are all the girls mean to Sarah? Like plays like that. I always use the name Sarah. So I mean, I was always interested in it. I think, one of my deep insecurities is that I feel like I was the poor kid that didn't have access, which is, it's not good or bad in terms of like, if you stick with it and if you want to do it. But I've always been jealous of people who, tell stories about like, I remember, when my folks took me to see my first Broadway show when I was 6 years old and it was Cats and I was hooked. And that was not ever me.
Well, what was your first Broadway show?
Right before I moved to New York to stay, I went there to audition, and it was December, and I saw The SEA GULL, by Chekhov on Broadway, and it starred Kristen Scott Thomas. And it was, I could not. It was so great. And she was so, I was literally in, the nosebleed seats. I was in the back row of this huge theater. At the moment, there's spoiler alert, her son kills himself at the end. It's a Chekhov play. I'm not ruining anything. You should know that play. But so there's this moment where he goes off stage. He's in the other room and you hear the gunshot and she's on stage. And in her body language, it was the most curious thing to see her go from sort of her spine having energy in it to this without dialogue, without words, to see her transform from the back of the fucking theater into a woman who knows that what her child has done. So it was pretty incredible.
That would have been an amazing first experience for sure.
Yeah, and then I've seen some things on Broadway that are pretty shitty too, and it made me think, oh right, so Broadway's it's not the brass ring necessarily. It's just a place where you can see plays.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So you studied in college, and then was Chicago the first place you went?
Yeah.
And what drew you there?
Many of my friends were, a year, 2 years or so older than I, and they all migrated to Los Angeles. And there was a time when I was getting close to graduation where I thought that's where I'm going to be as well. And so I visited, a handful of times before I graduated. I just sort of got the impression that it wasn't for me. It's not that I didn't like it. I just think that I had enough self-awareness then to know that I wasn't ready. I didn't know who I was. And so, a town like Los Angeles, a scene like Hollywood can really mess a person up. If you don't go in going, this is what you get. And I, have things to offer you, but I'm not going to kill myself mentally, emotionally, to try to transform into a thing that's impossible for me to be. It just, a young person with stars in their eyes, I think it's very easy to not know your inner voice, who your artist is, and just try to be the thing that other people want you to be. And it's never going to be a suggestion to be your authentic self unless you already know what that is and you can show it to them. LA was I toyed with it, but I knew quickly that I wanted more. I wanted to practice more, and that's what Chicago gave me.
Cool. And when you got to Chicago, did you have a good network there? Good support group or anything?
No, no, I didn't. I remember sitting in a bar in Kansas with a friend of mine who is a music theater guy. So, and that's not my, I sing, but I don't do music theater. So we didn't run in exactly the same circles, but we had the same general kind of desire to do work on stage. And I remember telling him, I think I'm not going to go to LA, and I'm not sure what to do about that. And I don't remember which of the two of us started floating this idea of Chicago, but then the conversation was basically, I've never been there. Well, I've never been there either. I hear it's really happening there. I hear that's the place where you can go and fail, and it's safe. You can experiment, and there's so much theater going on there that you can find your tribe. And so we just sort of unseen decided that's what we were going to do. Neither of us had ever been, and we went, and we didn't have a community. And and my friend, I would later discover, was also not out with his sexuality yet. So there was the two of us in a city sort of dealing with how do we reach out when we know no one but each other, and we don't do exactly the same thing. It was really that first year was just about trying to figure out, I did a lot of temp jobs, and that's a great place to meet. That's a great way to meet actors, other actors. So meeting actors on jobs and saying, who do you work with? What do you see? What do you like? Are you in a show? Can I see your show? Where are you going after your show? Are you going to get drinks? Is this an actor bar? I'll come back here again if it's an actor bar. And just sort of like, being slightly crazy-ish, but when you're in your early 20s, everybody is anyway. It's creepier the older you get. But I think when you're, no one knows what they're doing or who their friends are when you just move to a city and you're right out of college. And so it felt like I was in with a lot of people who were also going, yes, please come see my show. I'd love for people to see my show. And I want to have a drink after. Please come. I barely know the people I'm in the show with anyway. So Chicago at that time, late 90s, early aughts, felt very celebratory about the newness and the unknown, what all is out there and how can we connect. That's what the theater scene felt like.
Did it take a long time before you felt settled there?
That's a great question. I don't know. I feel like I was starting to get settled there when I moved to New York. And that would have been, nine-ish years after, 10 years after I first got there. But in retrospect, no. Like looking back, I think, and the first year too that I was there, I moved in the fall. And then that winter was record-breaking snows up to people's necks. It was post-apocalyptic. You couldn't walk on the sidewalks because the snowdrifts were over people's heads, and people were stuck in their houses forever. And it was so freezing cold. I remember being on the train platform and icicles on my eyelashes and in my nose, and thinking, oh God, what have I done? Why would anyone be here? This is so awful. Chicago is very working class, and that applies to the acting world, the theater community, the people who base their creative world out of Chicago. It's not a star-making town. And I think that's kind of lovely because people don't expect to be treated like they're anything different than anyone else. Everyone who's in a show is, the star of the show. It's always an ensemble experience. And so I think because of that, it wasn't until in hindsight I looked back and thought, God, I really did. I booked show after show after show and worked with this person and that person and was always working as much as I wanted, that I sort of realized, yeah, no, I did settle in really quick. I think I also just suffer from, because I grew up in a military family, I always feel like the new kid. And also I landed in a small town growing up. And yes, I moved there in the 4th grade, but it was such a small town that, really only a few other people moved there between then and when I graduated. So I always felt like I was one of the newest kids.
Lead me up to leaving Chicago and what took you to New York.
I was a member of a theater company in Chicago called The Hypocrites. That had been my artistic home kind of. Well, that was the very first show that I did in Chicago was with the Hypocrites, and I worked with them consistently the time that I was there. And in my last year in Chicago, we did a production of Our Town and invited a director who was not a company member, but was a friend of the company and, a sort of a guy about town in the Chicago theater circles. This guy, David Cromer, who asked him to come in and direct the show. And I was, excited that David was going to be working for us because he had a great reputation, but not excited about doing Our Town, really. So I was surprised when David called and said, hey, do you want to play the lead in Our Town? So we did that production at the same time that a much bigger theater in Chicago called Looking Glass Theater did a production of Our Town. Almost simultaneously, we were doing the productions, our own productions. And the one at Looking Glass featured Looking Glass ensemble members like Joey Slotnick, and David Schwimmer was playing George. And so, we went into it with the assumption that we're just going to get buried by this bigger theater company that had, star power and whatever. And David Cromer was really able to unlock something in that play that was special and that people got excited about. And so the show did very, very well. We sold out our first run of it immediately. And then because of the way that shows work in Chicago, you don't just extend and extend and extend like you do in New York. You book a space for a finite amount of time. You run your show for 6 weeks or 8 weeks or whatever, and then you close, and then that's it. Everybody moves on. Again, it's not a city of star makers, right? The press doesn't they don't necessarily, extend shows or close shows the next day. They just don't have that power in Chicago. But what did happen was, because the demand to see the show was so high, and so people really wanted to get in, we brought it back for a second run, and it sold that run out immediately as well. And then the New York producers decided that they wanted David to come to New York and do the show there. But there was no guarantee that that people from the Chicago production would get to go with it. It wasn't going to be a transfer of the same production. Each of us were offered the chance to audition for our role back. And so I went to New York, and that was when I saw the SEA GULL in December, and auditioned with lots of lovely, much younger, very New York sort of actors who were going to also be auditioning for Emily Webb. And they kept me on the hook for a long time. It wasn't until a month later I got the call when they said, the New York producers said, listen, you got the job. You've got 1 week to get here until, rehearsals start.
And you just went?
I just went. I was a newlywed. I'd been married 3 months at that point. Obviously, I didn't audition for the show without really discussing it with my partner. And we had both felt like, because he was an actor as well, and we both felt like Chicago's great and we love it here. But I think in particular, he was really feeling like, we're not getting any younger, and wouldn't it be great to be able to check off, we did the New York actor thing. And especially as people, we were in our early 30s then, with a level of accomplishment under our belts that, we weren't going to be going into the New York scene. Well, we weren't going to be probably out late carousing and getting mugged. And, anybody can get mugged. I don't mean it like that, but that we would be coming into a city that can eat people up. With a sense of who we are and with an eye to what it takes to protect ourselves. So he dropped that in my ear of like, maybe if they ask you to audition, you think you should, because we could do that. But yeah, I think if it was just me on my own, I probably would have been scared to commit to something like that. But I had good encouragement.
And of course, when you did commit to it, you had no idea that it would go on for so long.
No idea. No idea. It is the longest continuously running production of Our Town in the United States history, and maybe the world. I think the world. So yeah, it's certainly, I didn't expect in my early mid 30s to be associated with, having played Emily Webb longer than anyone else in the history of this great American play. I mean, I never considered myself an ingenue. So it's a weird association to make, but yeah.
Actress Jennifer Grace. Another wonderful guest is cult icon Mink Stole.
John Waters will tell you a story that I threw a saxophone at him. We didn't speak after we finished filming Pink Flamingos. I moved out.
You can hear my full interview with Mink at filmmakingconfidential.com or by subscribing for free to this podcast. We'll be right back with Jennifer Grace. Stay with us. I'm Steve Balderson, and this is the Filmmaking Confidential podcast. I'm back with Jennifer Grace.
What David did, that I think that his genius is in his ability to just separate what matters and what doesn't. He works really efficiently and really simply. So he went back to the idea of that first line in the play: no scenery, no props. And so he interpreted that to mean this is just the people. It's going to mean something different to the people who see it now if they see it in oldie tiny costumes. Those are going to be characters that they don't relate to. So let's put the actors in modern day clothes. And so the costume design evolved from what each of us in the show, what we were showing up to rehearsal in. At the time, I was a little scrappy, cutesy thing. And I put my hair up in these tiny little buns. That's just how I wore my hair. And David was like, that's it. That's great. You're going to wear it that way in the first act. So that became, my little girl had these little buns that I already did. And we all had versions, and they were all costumes, but we were costumed to look like we had just walked in from wherever we had been. Then working off of that, it all sort of came out from there. The lighting design became, what if the lights are just up and it looks like a rehearsal? So everyone is in the room together. I see the audience sees me. And we performed it in the round. So there was no boundary between, and there were, audience members on stage with us. We would walk through and around them, and it became about our town is we're in this theater together. It's not some bullshit old story about stuff that doesn't matter to you. And if that's what you think it's about, you're missing it, which is what the play is saying, right? That you're missing it. You're not paying attention. And then all of that builds to the third act, which is incredible to me because David, when he called me and said, hey, I want you to play Emily, he had all this stuff already planned out. So he said in that phone call, he said, would you want to play Emily? And I said, I don't know. I don't think I'm right for the role. I think I'm too old and I'm too whatever. I don't know. And he was like, well, just hear me out. I want you to sort of hear my idea. And he was like, I'm thinking about building a fake wall at one side of the theater. So at the end of the play, when Emily goes to the graveyard and sits down, and then she says, I want to live over one day of my life. I want to go back. Up until then, all we see is just, lights up. Everybody's in their regular costumes. We can see the audience. The audience can see us. We haven't acted like anything special is going on. We're not doing phony accents. We're not doing New England accents. And he said, so then when the stage manager says, all right, you can go back, we're going to literally break open this wall. And there, for 3 minutes, however long that scene is, we're going to see a hyper-realistic turn-of-the-century New England farmhouse kitchen. We're going to see through the back window the light of slow morning dawn coming up. The mother's going to come down the stairs in this immaculate turn-of-the-century dress. The father comes in. They all have those New England accents. And the mother is going to, because the scene takes place, it's Emily Webb's 12th birthday. The mother is cooking breakfast. So we're going to have a working stove, and we're going to fry bacon. And as the scene goes on, the smell of bacon starts to just sort of infiltrate everyone's senses in the theater. And the effect was devastating on people. I mean, it was, it was overwhelming to be in that moment when the curtain came back and hear the gasps, because people had sat with us for 2 hours at that point, seeing nothing. We're underplaying everything. Every conversation is about the chicken feed or, then for this little sliver of time, they feel what Emily feels, which is, oh my God, why didn't I pay attention to how special my life was? I didn't think it was enough. I didn't think there was anything worth remembering. And so that was the genius of what David did. And the joke is that it gets reduced down to the bacon. And I like to complain that the bacon was far and away the star of that show, and fuck that bacon. but I mean, I get it. There's something in the metaphor. There's something in that saying of wake up and smell the bacon. There's something in how that smell makes many of us in this country, at least, think of our childhood of waking up to one of your parents cooking breakfast.
Did you do any TV work while you were in New York?
Yes.
I know that you made your film debut in my movie.
Yes.
But if you were in television, show or something that had been filmed.
Uh-huh.
How was that?
That
segue?
was after. That would have been after your film. And I want to say 2012. In fact, no, I know it was 2012 because it has this awful, dubious distinction of the first TV show I shot was Inside Amy Schumer. And we shot on the day of the Sandy Hook massacre, which I didn't know until we were released from set. And I was in the van on the way back home, and I got the news, and I was like, what a mind-boggling juxtaposition to be like having this thrilling experience of shooting comedy, which I love and I don't get to do as much as I wish I did, and having this kind of joyful experience and then coming out and seeing such awful news. Yeah. So I remember exactly when it was.
When did we do Casserole Club?
2010.
What was your feeling about film itself?
I love film, and I love that there's a freedom. You can be so much more, you can be really versatile if subtlety is allowed into your bag of tricks. And that's a difficult thing to do with stage work when you're, wondering if the people in the far left corner are going to be able to see you because you're turned away from them or whatever, if they're going to get this bit of information. I think there's a freedom in just bringing it all down, because in a lot of ways, film means that you have an audience of one. It's just your relationship with the camera and what you're giving to the camera. Which is not to say that you should spike the camera and do all your scenes right to lens, of course. But it is about this thing of like, it can be really, really little and really beautiful. And I think the smallness of it is just really exciting to me.
What is something that excites you about using your abilities as a performer or writer or director in sharing with the world? What are some things that excite you that you want to, that drive you to share?
A lot of it comes from my experiences, life experiences. I mean, honestly, I'm not sure how anybody can derive a desire to do something that's not based on where they come from, right? And so for me, that is fueled a lot by being a woman in this business and and also really post Our Town, the way that people tried to put me in the box of like, okay, now you're going to keep playing this little girl. You're going to keep playing this innocent little girl. And I was going on auditions that I just was clearly not right for in my late 30s. And you're calling me in to play, this junior high school kid next to people who were actually junior high school kids. So I think that I was fueled by, it seems to me to be very true that movies, TV shows, plays, they kind of don't know what to do with women after your 20s and until your Mother Courage, which is, a great old lady role, or, until if in TV terms, I say once you get out of soccer mom, or if maybe you're on the stripper track, maybe you're on whatever the version of your young woman is, then you kind of don't do anything until you get to district attorney. And like, it's infuriating to me how many human experiences are overlooked. And so I'm really interested in, as a writer, as a director, as an actor, I'm interested in what about the rest of us? How about the stories for those of us who aren't your mom who makes the best granola? Or how about let's have some roles for women where they're not commodified, or they're not there just to be a sex worker or to be, like a saint, the saint, the virgin, the sex worker. Tired of those things. That my experience as a mother, as a widow, like I feel like we don't talk enough about the ugly parts of life. And as a result, when the ugly parts of life hit us, because they will inevitably, that's what being alive is like, we don't have the tools. We don't know how to deal with them because we're not being shown, it's not being normalized for us. So I'm interested in finding the beauty in the odd, the outcast, the ugly, the sort of awfulness, because I think that there always is humor and warmth and growth to be found in those places. And I like looking for them there.
That's beautiful.
Oh, thank you.
And I am so excited to see your latest creation.
Oh, thank you. I'm very, very excited about it too. I'm also, since you and I spoke about the draft of my piece, this sort of speaks to what you were asking me. So I have made one of the characters now is explicitly non-binary. And that was important to me because I'm always trying to think about how to make room for folks who are something other than white, straight, cis male. What about the rest of the folks? And so I'm excited to have that character and to be portrayed by a person who is non-binary as well. And, to get that person's okay to make this adjustment was something that I'm really excited about.
Cool.
Yeah.
I was raised an Army brat, so
I'm an Army brat too.
Okay, so you understand. Was there a sense of since you were always the new kid, that you were always having to not only had a chance to reinvent yourself, but you had to find what the dots were to fit in. I don't like they would lead to your acting.
That is something that it always pricks my attention up when I read about it from other people in the arts, whether it's music or performing or, what have you, how many folks who had that kind of upbringing seem to gravitate that way. And, it's not a thing that automatically comes to my mind, but I will say, if I really take the time to sit with it, the ending of Our Town, Emily Webb has this famous speech where she just says goodbye to everything. And part of the reason that I think I excelled at that, people said they liked that, is that was always devastating for me. Being little and feeling like I've got it, these are my folks, I finally fit in with this group, and then saying goodbye. And so there's something in that formed me. And also, like this idea of I'm going to have to rely on myself for entertainment, to create the stories, that I am going to be my own sort of traveling circus, even if it's just in my imagination. Yeah, I think that's absolutely comes from being an Army brat.
It's just interesting to hear someone else say that.
Yeah, no, it's true. And that's not something that people have asked me very often, but I always note it when I see it in interviews. So I'm glad that you made that connection. I think most people wouldn't. And if you've lived it, then you kind of get it, I think.
Yeah, you find that, at least I did, and I started out in theater too. The gypsy life fit in with the dynamics of how I was raised.
Yeah.
I had no problem living out of a Foot Locker.
Yes.
That's just how I traveled for years.
I always joke that the thing about gravitating towards theater or acting in general, any kind of working on creative stuff like that, is that with each project, I lovingly call it's the first day of school. These are going to be my new batch of friends. And
I see it as a new family.
Yeah. I mean, it's a
because
chance
you formed that kind of unity. Mm-hmm. And that was always what drew me to theater. It was, people had religion, and I said, well, theater was always my temple.
Yeah.
I would go there, and those people were the like mind. They were the kind of the outcasts. And it felt like when you bonded with them, the experience, the connection. That's why when you said Our Town, I thought, oh man, that had to be amazing, because that kind of family unity develops.
Yeah. I mean, I'm still friends with all those folks.
Yeah. See, I am too, with people that I've known for years ago I worked with, and New York I was on a subway and I ran into a buddy, and we just kind of looked at each other, and I said, how you doing, man? And he goes, hey, great. What are you doing in New York? I said, I'm here for a friend's wedding. And we hadn't seen each other in probably 20 years, but it was like that immediate connection. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Hey, Kim, do you have a question or a comment for Jen?
How long were you doing the Our Town show in New York City?
First, I did it in Chicago, and then I did it in New York for almost 2 years. And then I did it in Los Angeles, in Santa Monica, And then I did it one final time in Chicago. But the longest stretch was in New York. That was almost 2 years.
What are the tips or secrets in playing the same part for so long?
That's a great question. And that was one of the things that I was really scared of. When we were getting ready to open in New York, there was already this feeling like this is probably going to be something special and it could run for a really long time. And those of us that had done it in Chicago, we knew that we had a special thing. And then, we had our New York friends who joined the show. The man who played my father in Our Town had done these incredible long runs of all kinds of, shows on Broadway, Mamma Mia and Hairspray and on and on and on. And I remember sitting with him one night before we opened and just saying, I'm really scared. I've never done a show for longer than a month or two. And he had, I thought, like the most beautiful visual language to talk about how he sustained a performance for a long time. And he said, I love long runs. That's all I want to do is long runs. And he said, I think of it as a marathon. When you're running a marathon, you don't sprint out of the gate, you pace yourself and you just sort of slow and steady get there. It's not, you can't look into the horizon for the finish line. You have to look in front of you. Then he said this thing that just made so much sense to me and it clicked in my brain. He said, when you're in rehearsal for any show, what you're doing is you're putting together the blueprints of a house, a structure. And you, the cast, you are going to live in that house. You're building the bones of this thing that you will inhabit. And in a long run, you may find that, you've plotted out these rooms in rehearsal. I'm going to go in the living room, I'm going to go in the dining room, and I'm going to go upstairs, and I'm going to go downstairs. You've got all that stuff plotted out, right? You'll find in a long run that you will go sometimes to go into the room that you always go into, and the handle doesn't work. You can't get in there because it's getting rickety. It's getting worn down. Your job as an actor is get in that fucking room. So maybe you're not going to go in the door anymore. Maybe you need to go outside and crawl in the window. Maybe you need to get a hammer and, bust it off its hinges. But your job is to go from here to there to the other parts of the structure that you've built. You will find that the same path will get worn out. So you have to be open to new routes to get you where you go.
Actress Jennifer Grace. You can see Casserole Club on Amazon Prime Video. Tune in next time for more Filmmaking Confidential. It is totally free to subscribe, and when you subscribe, you'll get upcoming new episodes automatically, and you'll have free access to all our past shows. Please leave a review to let us know how we're doing. The Filmmaking Confidential podcast is a production of Dakanga Audio and produced by myself and Ella Spencer. Our theme music is composed by Kevin Robles. For more of the Filmmaking Confidential podcast, head over to filmmakingconfidential.com. To learn more of my filmmaking secrets, be sure to pick up a copy of the book Filmmaking Confidential, available on Audible, paperback, and ebook, wherever books are sold. I'm Steve Balderson. Thanks for listening and spreading the word. Until next time, keep making, keep doing, keep going.